Hey everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey Media here. And first of all, I want to say Happy New Year. Hopefully, by the time I'm recording this video, or as of me recording this video, it is currently December 31st, which is New Year's Eve. And hopefully I can get it posted on New Year's Eve as well, because I still got to post my 5th video for the month of December. But I just thought I'd get that out of the way. And as you saw in the last video, I did my top 10 worst movies of 2024, and now I'm here doing my top 15 best movies of the year. I saw a total of 38 movies this year, and like I said, 13 of them were on the worst if you include the dishonorable mentions, and now we got 15 best with 2 honorable mentions. So that's 17 and 13, so that makes 30. So there are 8 movies that did not appear on either list. So not sure if y'all want me to do a video on that and ranking those movies, but for now I'm going to do my top 15 movies, and now I want to give a shout out to a few honorable mentions, and those movies are Ghostbusters Frozen Empire and Mufasa the Lion King. Yep, I didn't think this movie was going to make it into at least into the top 15, let alone the honorable mentions, but it just barely managed to squeak through. So without further ado, let's get into my list for the top 15 best movies of 2024. So for my number 15, this movie was honestly, even though some of the major characters weren't in it, I still thought it was a decent film, and that is, of course, Kung Fu Panda 4. Yep, Kung Fu Panda 4 is at my number 15. I gotta say, I honestly was surprised when the Furious 5 didn't show up, and they did sort of try to explain why the characters weren't there, and that, I guess that would explain the smaller budget, too, because if you did look back, every single movie for Kung Fu Panda had at least $100 million to $125 million for the budget, as far as I know, and that was mainly because of the actors who played the Furious 5, and because this movie did not have them, the budget was only $85 million, as far as I know, and the movie made almost $600 million, which is still considered a huge success. So I'm really hoping that they continue, because they say there were supposed to be 6 movies in total, so I wonder how movie 5 is going to go. But for number 15, I gotta go with Kung Fu Panda 4. So at number 14, I have Furiosa. Now, this is based off of the Mad Max films, which, to be fair, this is the only one of the entire franchise I've seen, which may come as quite a surprise, but I recently did just get all the other movies, including Furiosa, on DVD, like in a whole case, so hopefully I'll watch the other ones soon, and maybe give you a ranking of those. If y'all want that, just let me know in the comment section below. But with Furiosa, it sort of shows Anya Taylor-Joy, who we last saw in the Super Mario Brothers movie as Princess Peach. Great film. And she really does nail the role of Furiosa. Again, I may have to watch some of the other movies to understand what the whole point of this franchise is, but I still thought it was a decent film. And I guess there's really nothing else I can say about it, so for number 14, I gotta go with Furiosa. So for number 13, this is a movie that was actually based off of a true story, and the crazy thing is I have been watching a lot of movies lately over the last couple of years that have actually been based on true stories, and this one is no different, and that is, of course, Arthur the King. It stars Mark Wahlberg as the titular main character, and he finds this dog that as he's doing this crazy I don't want to say cross country, I'm not entirely sure, but it's basically a race where you do running, you do canoeing, you do zip lining. It's a crazy thing, but apparently it's a real thing in the real life. And this guy almost thinks he's gonna not only lose again, but he also thinks he's gonna die afterwards. And so he finds this, and then he encounters this dog, and he basically, the two share a really big bond with each other. The dog helps him and his team get through some tough terrain and in tough situations, but then by the end of the movie, the dog is the one who almost dies, and the man really wants to save him. And I thought that was a really good story, especially if it was based on a true story. So for number 13, I gotta go with Arthur the King. So for my number 12 movie, I actually gotta go with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Yep, this is the fourth Planet of the Apes movie that's been released in the 2000s. And this sort of still connects to the original trilogy for Rise, Dawn, and War of the Planet of the Apes. And I gotta say, it really does tell a decent story of how people who were inspired by Seizure, played by Andy Serkis, those apes want to try to still coexist with humans, but some humans, unfortunately, are taking his name and tainting it, and they think that they are above humans and everything. So I thought that was interesting. So I'm curious where the story is going to develop. But for number 12, I gotta go with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So for my number 11, this movie almost managed to make it into the top 10, but unfortunately it didn't. I still thought it was a pretty great sequel though, and that is Beetlejuice 2. I'm not going to say the whole name 3 times though, because he's going to appear. But with this movie, I gotta say, it takes place literally almost the exact same amount of time from when it was when the first movie was released, and I gotta say, the story they created or whatever for this movie was pretty great. It's just a shame that the original two ghosts, played by Alec Baldwin, and I forgot the name of the other lady, but those two, because the actors got so old in the last 30 some years since the last movie, of course they had to find a way to make it to where they couldn't reappear. But I still thought it was a decent film. Michael Keaton, as always, is great. Winona Ryder is great. If they ever decide to do a third movie, which I feel like they will because of how well the second movie did, if there's one actor I want to see them bring in for, even if it's a small cameo, I want to see them bring in Johnny Depp. He's gonna, because the director of the films, Tim Burton, and Johnny Depp work so well together. And I feel like if Tim Burton gave Johnny Depp a chance, especially after his little debacle 2 years ago, I feel like he would definitely be welcomed back by so many of his fans who have watched his movies. So for number 11, I gotta go with Beetlejuice 2. Only said it twice. So for my number 10, now we're into the top 10. Speaking of actors who deserve a second chance after some debacles, for number 10, I gotta go with Bad Boys Ride or Die. This is the fourth installment of the Bad Boys franchise with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. And specifically, the actor I'm referring to is, of course, Will Smith, because we know 2 years ago he had an unfortunate incident at the Oscars where he went up on stage and did towards Chris Rock.
Oh, Richard! Oh, wow! Wow!
And I gotta say, ever since then, his whole thing has been just crazy. And now I'm hearing that they're trying to do a Men in Black 5 with him, but he's insisting that his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, who sort of had a little bit of a hand in the whole situation back in 2022, and supposedly they're saying that she is hard to work with, that the people who are behind Men in Black, and he's desperately trying to get her to be in the movie. I don't know how that whole thing's going to go down, but I will say with Bad Boys Ride or Die, it was a crazy story, and because you would think that this movie would have been the name of the third movie, because that movie was called Bad Boys for Life, and I don't know what they're going to name the fifth one if they ever decide to do that one. But so for number 10, I got to go with Bad Boys Ride or Die. So for number 9, even though this movie did not do so well at the box office, I still thought it was a decent story. It was definitely better than the last Transformers movie we got, in my opinion. And that is, of course, Transformers 1. Now, Transformers 1 basically sort of tells the origin of both Optimus Prime and Megatron, but back then, Megatron was not called Megatron, and I think even Optimus wasn't called Optimus, but they literally. But the way that they told the story and why the Decepticons became the way they were, I thought it was a decent story. It was definitely better than what we got in the first original series by Michael Bay. I will say, out of all the Transformers movies that have come out, I still think Bumblebee is the best one, in my opinion. And this one follows a close second. Then it's Rise of the Beast, and then it's the first Transformers, and then all the other ones. You see what I'm going with there? But I thought it was a decent film. So for number 9, I gotta go with Transformers 1. So for my number 8 movie, I think this is the only other movie that's based on a true story that came out this year that I saw, and that is, of course, Ordinary Angels. Now this is another, like I said, this is another true story movie where a woman hears about this young father who has a kid who is sick with some sort of illness, but he doesn't have the proper funding to be able to care for her, and she's been trying to make a living off of earning money, and so however she's moved by how much this father cares for his daughter, and she goes out of her way. She even inspires the entire community to go forward and help her, and she ends up getting saved, and again she goes on to live a healthy, happy life, and I thought this was a much better film than Arthur the King, but I still thought they were both really good films. So for number 8, I gotta go with Ordinary Angels. So for my number 7, you knew this was gonna be somewhere on the list, even though I literally just saw it almost a week ago, and that is, or I take that back, 10 days ago, and that is, of course, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Yep, this movie ended up on my best films, no surprise. And I will admit, I think this is my favorite Sonic movie out of all 3 of them. Even more than the Knuckles series that came on Paramount Plus. With Sonic 3, the way they ended this movie was crazy. And however, clearly it's not ending well enough, because they already announced right as the movie came out on the 20th, which was my birthday, as a matter of fact. They literally had an announcement that the 4th movie was already in development right there. So you know they're going to keep going with this franchise. But honestly, Jim Carrey is great as not only Igor Robotnik / Eggman, but he's also playing a second role with his grandfather, Gerald Robotnik. Now, don't be starting to hate on me in the comments, but I never played the Sonic games. I've only heard about stories about them, and I've seen little bits and clips of people playing the games, but I've never played them myself. So, but I will say, I'm starting to get into the Sonic universe, and I'm really hoping that eventually I go to play some form of the games, even if it's some of the newer ones. So, for number 7, I gotta go with Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So, for my number 6 movie, this movie was pretty good, I will admit, and that is, of course, Dune Part 2. Now, I never read the books that this series is based on, but I did see the first movie. Funny enough, I did not see it in theaters. I actually saw it on HBO Max at the time when it was still known as HBO Max, mainly because at the time the movies were still in the pandemic phase, and so Warner Brothers was doing this whole thing where they released the movie in theaters and on HBO Max at the same time, as long as you had like a subscription for it. And I gotta say, I still thought it was a decent film. So when Dune Part 2 came out, this time I decided, you know what, I'll go see it in theaters this time, and it turns out it was a good thing, because it was a really good film to see in theaters, I will admit. The story seems like it's really evolving, and I can't wait to see what happens in the 3rd film, whenever that comes out. But for number 6, I gotta go with Dune Part 2. So, for my number 5 movie, honestly, I did not expect this to be a great film, but after watching it, I thought, you know what? I actually enjoyed this. And that is, of course, Wicked. Yep, Wicked is a movie that, honestly, I was not expecting it to be a great film. I mean, I never actually watched the Broadway musical, but I gotta say, I thought this was pretty good, and apparently the actresses who played the characters in the Broadway musical actually made cameos, which was even better. And I'm really excited for Wicked Part 2 now that I've seen this. So for number 5, I gotta go with Wicked Part 1. So for my number 4 movie, this movie, I gotta admit, I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, it was a worthy follow-up sequel to the movie that came out back in 2015, and I'm surprised that they made a sequel so early when this company is known for waiting forever to make their sequels in some cases. But that is, of course, Inside Out 2. Yep, Pixar has finally released another movie with Inside Out 2, and I gotta say, this movie was, in my opinion, I mean, it wasn't my favorite Disney film, unfortunately. That will be at number 3, but with this movie, I gotta say, Inside Out 2, really great way to introduce the emotion anxiety, which is something I am perfectly well aware of because of my current disability with autism. So just for those of you who didn't know about me, but with the way they introduced anxiety in this movie, even though this is centered around a young girl with these emotions, I still found them relatively moving, especially with how they handled anxiety. So I gotta say, I'm really looking forward to what Pixar hopefully does that's better. That's especially if they continue to do more sequels. So for number 4, I gotta go with Inside Out 2. Okay, so for number 3, again, this is the last Disney movie that's on this list, unfortunately. You may think there's 2 movies I think that came out from Disney that are not on here that I haven't said yet. Actually 3 if you count Alien Romulus, which that's not one of them. I never actually saw that movie. But unfortunately, my number 3 is Deadpool and Wolverine. Yep, you knew this was going to make it somewhere on the list. And like I said, Ryan Reynolds and Sean Levy, the director, who I'd known him from the Night of the Museum movies, still great films. And I also know him from The Adam Project, which was another movie that came out, I think, a few years ago. I gotta say, this film was so great. We see the return of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and we even saw another variant of Wolverine that was not played by Hugh Jackman, but the guy who played him, I hope they bring him in eventually as the new Wolverine. But with Deadpool and Wolverine, I loved how this was sort of like a send-off to all the Fox characters, especially when Disney bought Fox back in 2018. And this was the perfect way to end off their universe and like sort of do a solid farewell in some way. I'm hearing some of the actors are still going to reappear, though, in Avengers Secret Wars when that comes out, so keep an eye out for that. But I'm really looking forward to seeing the future of the X-Men in the MCU. So for number 3, I gotta go with Deadpool and Wolverine. Okay, so for number 2, I actually completely forgot that this was also based on a true story. So I have 3 movies that are based on true stories in this list. But for number 2, I gotta go with the movie Reagan. Now, you may find this as surprising because I was not alive during Reagan's years. Ronald Reagan, who was the president during that time in the 80s. But I will say the way they told his story, though, in such a short amount of time, I gotta say, I'm really surprised with how they did it. And the guy who they got to play Reagan really did look just like him. And that was, of course, Dennis Quaid, who, if y'all don't know who that is, he was the only actor I remember who's, aside from Lindsay Lohan, who was in The Parent Trap. If y'all saw my review of that for its 25th anniversary, that was pretty crazy. But with Reagan, I gotta say, it was so nice to see why he was one of the greatest presidents of all time. He won by like the biggest landslide in presidential history in one of his terms. I forgot which term it was, but if we can see like a repeat of that sort of presidency, maybe we'll see that with our returning president from 2016. But like I said, who knows how things are going to go down. So for number 2, I got to go with Reagan. So for my number 1 movie, honestly, I did not expect this movie to be the craziest animated film of all time this year. But after I saw it, I thought, you know what? This was not a bad film. And that is, of course, DreamWorks' The Wild Robot. Now, you may find this shocking, but it turns out that the guy who directed this movie, Chris Sanders, he actually used to be an employee for the Walt Disney Company when he was working on animated films for them. But unfortunately, if y'all don't know what's been happening with Disney over the last few years, they have just been going downhill when it comes to focusing more on DEI as in their films and not actually focusing on proper storytelling and too much, and that's why a lot of their films have flopped. Now this year was just a big coincidence because, like I said, movies like Deadpool and Wolverine, Inside Out 2, Mufasa the Lion King, all this stuff. These movies were, especially Inside Out 2, as far as I know. Inside Out 2 was the one I heard did have some sort of DEI messaging in it, and they had to beg Disney to get that taken out, and that's why the movie ended up being the highest animated film of all time, because of them taking out the stuff. I don't know if Disney's ever going to learn, but with The Wild Robot, this movie did not have any of that. They did focus on proper storytelling and a decent message of parenthood and in some ways and machines, but the way they told it was so moving. And that's why this movie ended up being my number 1 film of the year, and which is, of course, The Wild Robot. So there you have it, guys. Those are my top 15 movies of 2024, which also includes 2 honorable mentions. Now, if there's any movies you think I missed that you think deserve to be in the top 15, just let me know in the comments below. And like I said, Happy New Year's Eve as of this recording. But I just thought I'd make this video really quick. Hopefully I can get it edited and posted before the end of today, which is New Year's. So anyways, I will see all of you guys in the next video.